Ambassador Kathrava stood before the great window of Memorial Station Orion 7 and watched the dead wormhole gate spin slowly in the void of space. And he felt the weight of 300 years pressing down upon his ancient shoulders like a mountain made of grief and regret. The gate was massive, a ring of metal and crystal that stretched across thousands of kilometers. But it was dark now, and it had been dark for 3 centuries since the day the hegemony made its terrible choice. Behind him, delegates from 6 of the 12 spheres gathered in the observation chamber. Their faces solemn and their voices hushed as they prepared for the tricentennial remembrance ceremony that would honor the billions who died when the Orion arm was abandoned to the Veth swarm. Kathrava remembered that day, even though he had been young then, barely more than a hatchling by the standards of the Alth, and the memory still burned in his mind like a wound that would never fully heal. The Veth had come from the outer darkness, a swarm of living ships and hungry mouths that consumed entire worlds and turned them into breeding grounds for more of their kind. And for 10,000 years, the hegemony had fought them and failed to stop them. Every weapon the great civilizations created was turned against them. Every defense was overwhelmed, and every world that fell only made the swarm stronger and more numerous. When the Veth broke through the Sagittarius arm and began moving toward the galactic core, where the homeworlds of the 12 spheres waited in terror, the Council faced an impossible choice. They could fight and die, or they could run and sacrifice others to buy themselves time. The Severance was the answer they chose. A network of controlled wormhole collapses that would cut off the entire Orion arm from the rest of the galaxy and trap the Veth in a prison of empty space and abandoned worlds. Billions of sentient beings lived in the Orion arm, hundreds of species both advanced and primitive, and all of them were left behind without warning or mercy. Kathrava had been on the council ship that gave the final order, and he had watched through sensors as the gates collapsed one by one, each flash of dying energy representing millions of lives condemned to death. There had been a young species on a small blue world called Earth, barely capable of reaching their own moon. And they too were sacrificed without ever knowing that a galaxy of civilizations had decided they were not worth saving. The hegemony told itself that the sacrifice was necessary, that the many must be protected, even at the cost of the few. But Kathrava knew the truth that hid behind those noble words. They had been afraid, and fear had made them cruel. For 300 years, the memorial stations orbited the dead gates, and diplomats made speeches about the noble sacrifice of the Orion species, and not once did any signal emerge from the darkness beyond. The Veth had consumed everything the hegemony believed, and the Orion arm was now nothing more than a graveyard stretching across 1,000 light years. "Ambassador," a young technician called out, her voice trembling with something that might have been confusion or fear. "We are detecting an anomaly near the gate." Kathrava turned from the window and looked at the junior officer, a member of the Ilathi collective with silver skin and wide eyes that now held an expression he could not identify. "What kind of anomaly?" he asked, and his voice was calm even though his heart had begun to beat faster. "Energy signatures," she replied. "Patterns we have never seen before, and they are increasing in intensity." The other delegates moved toward the sensor displays, their conversations dying as they watched the readings climb higher and higher. And Kathrava felt a chill run through his scales that had nothing to do with the temperature of the station. "That is impossible," the Kos Confederacy Admiral declared, his forearms crossed in disbelief. "Nothing can generate power like that without a stellar mass nearby." But the sensors did not lie, and as they watched, the energy signatures continued to grow until they exceeded anything the hegemony had ever recorded. Then space itself began to fold. Kathrava had studied physics in his youth, and he knew that what he was seeing could not happen according to every model and theory the hegemony had developed over 1,000,000 years of scientific advancement. Space did not fold. It could not fold. And yet, before his eyes, the very fabric of reality twisted and compressed until a point of absolute darkness appeared in front of the dead gate. The point expanded, growing larger and larger, and through it came a ship unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. It was sleek and angular, covered in armor that seemed to drink the light around it, and it moved with a grace and speed that made the finest hegemony vessels look like stones sinking through water. More ships followed, dozens of them, each one different in size, but all sharing the same impossible design and the same dark beauty. The lead vessel came to a stop directly before Memorial Station Orion 7, and for a long moment, nothing happened while the delegates stood frozen in shock and disbelief. Then the communication systems crackled to life, and a voice spoke in Old Galactic Standard, the ancient language that had not been used for formal contact in over 2,000 years. "Orion armed to Hegemony Command," the voice said, and it was calm and clear, and carried an edge of steel beneath its diplomatic tone. "We request diplomatic contact, and humanity speaks for the arm." The observation chamber erupted into chaos as delegates shouted questions and demanded explanations. But Kethrava remained silent and still as the weight of those words pressed down upon him. Humanity, the young species from the small blue world, the primitives who could barely reach their own moon when the severance occurred, now spoke for the entire Orion arm. How was this possible, he wondered. How could any species survive the Veth when the combined might of the 12 spheres had failed for 10,000 years? "Respond to them," he ordered, and his voice cut through the noise like a blade. "Open a channel immediately." The technician scrambled to obey, and within moments the main screen flickered to life, showing the bridge of the human vessel. A woman stood at the center of the image, her hair dark and her eyes darker, and she wore a uniform of deep blue covered in medals and insignia that Kethrava did not recognize. Behind her, human officers worked at stations filled with technology that seemed to pulse with an inner light. And through the windows of the bridge, he could see the other ships of the fleet waiting in perfect formation. "I am Fleet Admiral Yuki Tanaka of the United Earth Coalition," the woman said, "and on behalf of the Orion Coalition, I bring greetings to the hegemony of the 12 spheres." "I am Ambassador Kethrava of the Dominion of Alth," he replied, "and I must ask how this is possible. How did you survive? What happened to the Veth swarm?" Admiral Tanaka smiled, and there was something in that smile that made Kethrava feel very small and very old. "The swarm is dead," she said simply. "Every hive queen, every spore ship, every contaminated world, all of it burned and sterilized. The Veth are extinct, and humanity made them so." The chamber fell silent as the impossible truth settled over them like a shroud. The species they had abandoned to die had not only survived, but had destroyed the enemy that had terrorized the galaxy for 10,000 years. "We did not come here for revenge," Admiral Tanaka continued. "Though many among our people believe we would be justified in seeking it, we came because the galaxy needs to know the truth." "What truth?" Kethrava asked, and he was surprised to find that his voice still worked. "The truth about what really waits in the darkness between the stars," she replied, "and the truth about why you need us far more than you could ever know." The wormhole behind the human fleet pulsed with energy, and Kethrava understood that the galaxy would never be the same again. The diplomatic delegation boarded the human vessel called the U.E.'s Perseverance, and Ambassador Kethrava felt his scales tighten with unease as he walked through corridors that hummed with power beyond anything he had ever experienced. The ship was beautiful in a way that was also terrifying. Every surface smooth and clean and designed with a purpose that spoke of long years of war and sacrifice. Admiral Tanaka had sent a shuttle to bring them across, and now she walked beside Kethrava with her hands clasped behind her back and her expression, revealing nothing of what she truly felt. "Your technology is remarkable," Kethrava said, trying to fill the silence with words. Folded space travel was considered impossible by our scientists. Your scientists never had a swarm of monsters chasing them across the stars. Tanaka replied, desperation makes many impossible things suddenly possible. They entered a large conference chamber, where human officers and diplomats waited around a curved table, and Kethrava noticed that none of them stood when the hegemony delegates arrived. In hegemony space, younger species always showed deference to their elders. But these humans remained seated and watched the newcomers with eyes that held curiosity, but no submission. A human male rose and extended his hand. A gesture Kethrava had learned was a human greeting, and the ambassador accepted the strange touching of palms. I am Marcus Cole, the man said, Chief Diplomatic Envoy for the United Earth Coalition, and I will be your primary contact during these negotiations. Negotiations, the Kos Admiral repeated, his voice sharp with offense. You speak as if you have standing to negotiate. You are survivors of a quarantine zone, not equals of the 12 spheres. Ambassador Cole smiled, and Kethrava noticed that his smile was very different from Admiral Tanaka's. Warmer on the surface, but perhaps hiding just as much steel beneath. With respect, Admiral, we stopped being victims the day we killed our first Veth Hive ship, Cole replied. And we stopped being your lessers the day we did what your hegemony could not do in 10,000 years. The Kos Admiral opened his mouth to respond, but Kethrava raised a hand to silence him. Please, the old ambassador said, we did not come here to argue about status. We came to understand how you survived and what you want from the hegemony now. Tanaka nodded and activated a holographic display that filled the center of the room with images and data. When the severance occurred, Earth had just achieved its first interstellar colony. She began. We detected the Veth approaching, and we knew from intercepted hegemony communications exactly what they were capable of. The images showed a blue and green world, beautiful and fragile, and then showed the world transformed into a fortress of orbital platforms and defense stations. We had less than 100 years before the swarm reached us. Tanaka continued, so we did something that the hegemony never did. We unified. Unified? A Elathi delegate asked. What do you mean? Every nation, every corporation, every individual human being agreed to work together toward one single goal, Cole explained. Survival at any cost. Project Prometheus became the only priority for our entire species. The hologram shifted to show human factories, producing ships and weapons at a scale that made Kethrava's hearts race with astonishment. We did not have your 1,000 years of accumulated knowledge, Tanaka said, but we had something else. We had the complete certainty that we would die if we failed. Fear drives innovation, Cole added, and we were very, very afraid. The images changed again, showing battles that made the hegemony's conflicts with the Veth look like minor skirmishes. Human ships swarmed around Veth Hive vessels, weapons blazing with energies that tore through organic armor like paper. And Kethrava watched in horrified fascination as entire fleets were reduced to burning debris. We lost billions, Tanaka said quietly. Entire generations grew up knowing nothing but war. Children learned to fire weapons before they learned to read. And we buried so many of our people that some worlds became nothing but graveyards. But we also learned, Cole continued, we learned how the Veth communicated, how they bred, how they thought, and we turned that knowledge into weapons they could not counter. The hologram showed strange devices being deployed into Veth Hive ships, and then showed those ships dissolving from the inside out. Nanoplagues, Tanaka explained, designed to consume Veth biomass and replicate until nothing remained. We became very good at extinction. Kethrava felt cold despite the warmth of the room. You did not just defeat them, he said slowly. You annihilated them completely. Yes, Tanaka confirmed. Every hive queen, every warrior, every egg, every spore, all of it gone. The Veth swarm exists now only in our historical records. The Kos Admiral leaned forward, his earlier hostility replaced by something that might have been respect or fear. "How many ships do you have?" he asked. "How large is your fleet?" Tanaka and Cole exchanged a look, and Kethrava felt certain that they were deciding how much to reveal. "Large enough," Tanaka replied. "But perhaps more important is what else we built during those centuries." The hologram changed once more, showing not just humans but dozens of other species working together, building together, fighting together. The Orion arm contained many species when the severance occurred, Cole explained. Some were nearly as advanced as humanity. Others were still in their Stone Age, but we reached out to all of them. "You conquered them," the Kos Admiral assumed. "No," Tanaka replied firmly. "We offered them a choice. Join us and survive together, or remain alone and die separately. Most chose to join." "The Orion Coalition now includes 47 species," Cole said, "and humanity leads not because we conquered, but because we were willing to sacrifice more than anyone else." Kethrava studied the images of alien faces he had never seen before, species that the hegemony had condemned to death 3 centuries ago, all of them now united under human leadership. "What do you want from us?" he asked finally. "You did not come all this way just to show us what you have built." Admiral Tanaka deactivated the hologram and sat down at the table, her eyes meeting Kethrava's with an intensity that made him feel like prey before a predator. "We want you to understand something," she said. "The Veth were terrible, but they were not the worst thing waiting in the darkness." "What do you mean?" the Ilathi delegate asked. "During our final campaign against the swarm, we discovered their homeworld," Cole explained. "And there we found records that changed everything we thought we knew about the universe." "The Veth were not natural," Tanaka continued. "They were created, engineered by a precursor race that vanished from the galaxy millions of years ago." Kethrava felt his scales turn pale as the implications became clear. "Created as what?" he asked. "As a test," Tanaka replied. "A test to find species strong enough to survive, and we passed that test." "But the records also contained a warning," Cole added, his voice grave. "The Veth were only the first wave. Something else sleeps in the void between galaxies, and one day it will wake." The conference chamber fell silent as the weight of those words settled over everyone present. "You need us," Tanaka said simply. "Your hegemony abandoned us because you were afraid, and now you must accept that the species you sacrificed may be the only thing standing between you and true extinction." Kethrava looked at the humans around the table, at their calm faces and steady hands, and he understood with terrible clarity that the galaxy had changed forever. The question was no longer whether humanity would join the galactic community. The question was whether the galaxy was ready for what humanity had become. Captain Darius Okonkwo stood on the bridge of the UES, relentless, and watched the stars of the border zone drift past the viewscreen. And he thought about his grandmother and the story she used to tell him when he was a child. She had been 7 years old when the Veth came to her world, and she remembered the sky turning red with fire and the screams of millions as the swarm descended upon everything she knew. Her parents had put her on a refugee ship with nothing but the clothes on her back and a small doll that she still kept in a glass case in her quarters. And they had stayed behind to fight and die so that she might live. Darius had grown up with her stories burned into his mind. Tales of burning cities and desperate last stands and the terrible day when the wormholes collapsed, and they realized that the galaxy had abandoned them to die. His grandmother had survived the first wave by luck, the second wave by courage, and the third wave by becoming a soldier at the age of 15 and learning to kill Veth with her bare hands if necessary. She was gone now, passed away 10 years ago at the age of 147. But her legacy lived on in her grandson and in the ship he commanded. "Captain," his first officer called out, "we have a contact on the edge of sensor range." Darius turned from the view screen, and walked to the tactical display, his boots making no sound on the deck that had been designed for silence and efficiency. "Identification?" he asked. "Hegemony design," the sensor officer reported. "Reading as a COS Confederacy reconnaissance drone. It crossed into Orion-claimed space approximately 3 minutes ago." Darius felt his jaw tighten as he studied the tiny signature on the display. The diplomatic negotiations were still ongoing at Neutral Station 7, but already the hegemony was testing boundaries and probing for weaknesses, just as they had always done. "They want to see how we respond," his first officer observed. "If we ignore it, they will think us weak. If we destroy it, they can claim we are aggressive. Then we will do neither," Darius replied. "Navigation, intercept course, weapons, charge the grappling projectors, but hold fire." The Relentless surged forward through space that bent around its hull like water around a diving bird, and within minutes they had closed the distance to the tiny drone. It was a standard COS design, built for long-range surveillance and data collection, and Darius knew that everything his ship did was being recorded and transmitted back to hegemony space. "Grappling projectors ready," the weapons officer announced. "Fire," Darius commanded. Energy beams lanced out from the Relentless and wrapped around the drone like fingers closing into a fist, and the small device was pulled helplessly toward the human vessel. "Drone captured," the sensor officer confirmed. "No damage to its systems, all recording devices still active." Darius nodded and turned to his communications officer. "Open a channel to the drone's transmitter," he ordered. "Let them hear exactly what I have to say." The officer worked her console and then nodded to indicate that the channel was open. "This is Captain Darius Okonkwo of the U.S. Relentless to whoever is receiving this transmission," Darius said, his voice calm and clear. "Your drone has violated Orion Coalition space without authorization. We have captured it intact and will be returning it to the nearest hegemony outpost." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "The Orion arm remembers what was done to us 300 years ago," he said. "We remember the billions who died because your hegemony decided we were not worth saving. We remember the children who grew up in war and the worlds that burned while your species watched from safety." His first officer watched him with approval in her eyes, and the bridge crew remained silent as their captain spoke the words that all of them felt. "We did not survive the Veth by being forgiving," Darius continued. "And we did not rebuild our civilization by trusting those who betrayed us. So hear me clearly when I say this. The Orion Coalition seeks peace. But we are prepared for war. Tread carefully." He signaled for the channel to be closed and then ordered the drone to be transported to the cargo bay for delivery. "Do you think they will listen?" his first officer asked. "No," Darius replied honestly. "They have spent 300 years believing they are superior to every species in the galaxy. They will not accept that the primitives they abandoned have surpassed them." "Then why bother with warnings?" she asked. Darius looked back at the viewscreen, at the stars that his grandmother had fought and died to protect, and he felt the weight of her memory pressing down upon him. "Because my grandmother taught me that we should always give our enemies a chance to choose peace," he said, "even when we know they will choose war." Far away at Neutral Station 7, Fleet Admiral Tanaka sat in her private quarters and reviewed reports that would have terrified any hegemony commander who saw them. The diplomatic mission was proceeding well on the surface, but beneath the polite words and careful negotiations, a shadow war was already being fought. Hegemony intelligence agencies were trying to infiltrate human systems. Hegemony military commanders were probing Orion defenses, and hegemony politicians were forming factions that ranged from those who wanted alliance to those who wanted extermination. Ambassador Cole entered her quarters without announcement, his face grave with news that could not wait. "The Circle of Preservation has made its move," he reported. "They have convinced 3 of the 12 spheres. to support a resolution declaring the Orion Coalition a threat to galactic stability. Expected, Tanaka replied. What else? They are also gathering intelligence on Sol, Cole continued, trying to find weaknesses in our home system defenses. Tanaka smiled, and there was no warmth in that smile at all. Let them look, she said. They will find only what we want them to find. There is one more thing, Cole said, and his voice dropped to barely a whisper. We have confirmed that the precursor warning is accurate. Our deep space monitoring stations have detected movement in the intergalactic void. Tanaka's smile vanished, and her face became stone. How long? She asked. Impossible to say precisely, Cole replied. But the movement patterns match the descriptions in the precursor records. Something is waking up out there. The Admiral rose from her desk and walked to the window that looked out upon the stars. The hegemony wastes time with politics and pride while something worse than the Veth stirs in its sleep, she said. We gave them a chance to understand, but they are too afraid and too arrogant to see the truth. What do we do? Cole asked. We continue preparing, Tanaka replied. Project Horizon must remain secret until we have no choice but to reveal it. The fleet that killed the Veth was only the beginning of what we have built. Cole nodded, understanding the weight of what they carried. And if the hegemony decides to move against us before we are ready to face what is coming? He asked. Tanaka turned to face him, and her eyes held the same fire that had burned in the eyes of every human who had fought and died in the war against the swarm. Then we will remind them why the Veth are extinct, she said. Humanity did not survive 140 years of war by being gentle, and we will not let the species that abandoned us prevent us from saving them. Outside the station, human ships maintained their silent vigil, and deep within their hulls, weapons slept that could crack worlds and tear stars from the sky. The galaxy did not know what was coming, but humanity knew, and humanity was ready. The attack came without warning at Velthus Station, a neutral trading post where human and hegemony merchants had begun to exchange goods and ideas for the first time in 3 centuries. Ambassador Cole had sent his daughter Elena there as a junior diplomat, eager to give her experience in the delicate work of building bridges between civilizations that had every reason to distrust each other. She was 26 years old, brilliant and compassionate, and she believed with all her heart that peace was possible if both sides were willing to reach for it. She was standing in the central marketplace when the explosion tore through the station and killed 12 humans in a flash of fire and twisted metal. Elena Cole died with a smile still on her face from a conversation she had been having with a young Elathi merchant about the music of their respective worlds. When the news reached Neutral Station 7, Ambassador Marcus Cole did not speak for 3 hours. He sat alone in his quarters and stared at a photograph of his daughter that he kept on his desk, and he thought about the last time he had seen her and the words he had said and the words he had not said. Fleet Admiral Tanaka found him there when she came to offer her condolences, and she saw in his eyes something that she recognized from her own reflection during the darkest days of the Veth War. The hegemony is claiming it was Orion separatists, she told him quietly. They say radical elements within our coalition are trying to sabotage peace. Lies, Cole whispered, and his voice was hollow and empty. Of course they are lies, Tanaka agreed. Our intelligence confirms that the attack was planned and executed by the Circle of Preservation. They used hegemony special forces disguised as merchants. Cole looked up at her, and the grief in his eyes had begun to transform into something harder and colder. They murdered my daughter to provoke us, he said. They want us to attack so they can claim we are the aggressors. Yes, Tanaka confirmed, and I will not give them what they want, not yet. Then, what will you do? Cole asked. Tanaka's expression did not change, but something in her eyes flickered with a fire that had burned down entire worlds. I will show them what they face if they choose war, she said, and then I will give them one final chance to choose differently. She left Cole with his grief and returned to her command center, where her senior staff waited with anticipation and barely contained rage. Every human officer in the fleet had learned of the attack, and every one of them wanted blood. "Admiral," her fleet commander reported, "all vessels are at combat readiness. We await your orders." "Signal the Horizon Fleet," Tanaka commanded. "Authorization code Prometheus 7. It is time for the galaxy to see what humanity truly built in the darkness." Across 17 points along the border between Orion space and hegemony territory, space began to fold and twist in ways that should have been impossible. The hegemony monitoring stations detected the anomalies first, and their operators scrambled to make sense of readings that exceeded every parameter. Their instruments were designed to measure. Then the ships began to appear. They emerged from folded space like leviathans rising from the depths of a dark ocean. And they kept coming and coming until the stars themselves seemed to dim in comparison. Dreadnoughts the size of small moons drifted into formation with weapons arrays that pulsed with contained energies capable of cracking planets. Carrier vessels disgorged swarms of fighters that moved in perfect coordination like flocks of predatory birds. Battle stations that had been hidden in the void for decades activated their systems and revealed themselves as fortresses, capable of withstanding anything the hegemony could throw at them. The hegemony military analysts watched their screens with mounting horror as the true size of the human fleet became clear. "Impossible," one admiral whispered. "They cannot have built this. Where did they get the resources? Where did they find the time?" But the ships were real. Thousands of them, and they represented more firepower than the combined militaries of all 12 spheres combined. And worse than the ships themselves were the energy signatures that human technology seemed to radiate, frequencies and patterns that the hegemony had never seen before and could not identify. The human vessels did not attack. They simply waited in perfect formation with their weapons powered and ready. And their silence was more terrifying than any threat could have been. Admiral Tanaka broadcast her message across every frequency the hegemony could receive, and her words echoed through the chambers of power on 100 worlds. "We did not survive the Veth by being weak," she declared. "We did not rebuild by being trusting. You abandoned us to die, and we remember, but we did not come here for vengeance." The leaders of the 12 spheres listened with fear and disbelief as the human continued. "We came because something worse than the Veth is coming," Tanaka said. "The precursor records warned of a threat that sleeps between galaxies. A threat that will wake and consume everything in its path, and your hegemony is not ready." She paused, letting her words sink in before delivering her final warning. "We are offering you one chance to stand with us," she said. "One chance to prove that the species who abandoned billions of innocent people have learned from your mistakes. Do not waste it." The message ended, and chaos erupted across hegemony space. 3 of the 12 spheres immediately sent messages requesting alliance negotiations, their leaders recognizing that resistance against such a force would be suicide. 2 spheres demanded war regardless of the odds, their pride refusing to accept subordination to species they still considered primitives. The remaining 7 fractured into endless debate, unable to agree on anything while the human fleet watched and waited. Ambassador Kathrava used this moment of confusion to make the most difficult decision of his long life. He gathered the intelligence he had collected on the Circle of Preservation and its true plans, and he transmitted everything to Admiral Tanaka in an encrypted burst that would mark him as a traitor to his own people. "The Circle has activated something called the Omega Protocol," his message read. "They found an ancient precursor weapon hidden in the galactic core, a device capable of destroying stars, and they have aimed it at Sol." Tanaka received the message and felt her blood turn to ice. "They would rather destroy humanity's homeworld than accept us as equals," she said to her command staff. They would murder billions to preserve their pride. "What are your orders?" her fleet commander asked. Tanaka looked at the tactical display showing her fleet arrayed along the border. And then she looked at the image of Earth that she kept on her console. The blue and green world that her species had fought so hard to protect. "All vessels," she commanded. "Emergency transition to Sol. We are going home to fight." The Horizon fleet began to move, folding space around themselves and vanishing from the border zone in waves of distorted light. Behind them, the hegemony watched in confusion, not understanding why the humans were withdrawing until Kathrava's warning reached the moderate factions. By then it was too late to stop what had been set in motion. The Battle of Sol was about to begin, and everything humanity had built would be tested against the madness of those who would rather destroy than accept change. The precursor dreadnought hung in space above Sol like a mountain of ancient metal and forgotten nightmares, and its weapon systems pulsed with energy that made the sun itself seem dim by comparison. Captain Darius Okonkwo stood on the bridge of the U.E.'s Relentless and watched the monster through his view screen, and he thought about his grandmother and the promise he had made to her memory. "We survived because we refused to stop," she had told him on her deathbed. "Promise me that you will never stop fighting for our people." He had promised, and now he intended to keep that promise even if it cost him everything. The Horizon fleet emerged from folded space in waves. Thousands of vessels pouring into the Sol system like an avalanche of steel and fire. And they immediately engaged the precursor weapon and the hegemony ships that had reactivated it. Admiral Tanaka commanded from the flagship U.E.'s Prometheus, her voice calm and steady as she directed the largest battle in human history. "All dreadnoughts, focus fire on the weapon's power core," she ordered. "Carrier groups, establish defensive perimeter around Earth. Strike squadrons. Clear a path to the primary target." The battle erupted across millions of kilometers as human ships clashed with ancient technology that seemed to rewrite the laws of physics with every attack. The precursor dreadnought fired beams of energy that erased matter from existence, and human vessels died by the dozens as they threw themselves into the path of those deadly rays. But humanity had spent 140 years learning how to fight things that should have been impossible to defeat. And they had not forgotten those lessons. Swarms of fighters dove through the precursor defenses, their pilots executing maneuvers that would have killed lesser beings. And they planted explosives on the weapon's outer hull that detonated in cascading chains of destruction. Dreadnoughts unleashed weaponized singularities that tore holes in the ancient armor. And assault carriers deployed boarding pods filled with soldiers, who fought room by room through corridors that had been empty for 1,000,000 years. Captain Okonkwo received his orders directly from Admiral Tanaka, and he felt his heart race as he understood what she was asking. "Relentless, you are to lead Strike Team Omega directly into the weapon's core," Tanaka commanded. "You must disable the primary power source before it can fire on Sol." "Understood, Admiral," Darius replied. "Relentless will not fail." He turned to his crew, men and women who had served with him through a dozen engagements against pirates and raiders and rogue hegemony forces, and he saw no fear in their eyes. "You heard the Admiral," he said. "We are going into the heart of that thing, and we are going to kill it. Any objections?" His first officer smiled grimly. "None, sir," she replied. "Let us show these ancient machines what humanity can do." The Relentless dove toward the precursor dreadnought with its shields at maximum and its weapons blazing, and around it flew 100 other vessels that formed Strike Team Omega. They punched through the outer defenses and entered a gap in the ancient armor that other ships had torn open at the cost of their own existence. Inside the weapon, the corridors twisted and turned in ways that made no logical sense. But Darius had studied the data recovered from Veth Prime, and he knew how to navigate the impossible architecture. "All hands, prepare to board," he commanded. "We go on foot from here." He led his soldiers into the darkness of the precursor vessel, their weapons lighting up corridors that had not seen movement in 1,000,000 years. Ancient machines activated to stop them, security systems that should have been dead coming to life with deadly intent, and humans fell screaming as energy beams cut through their armor. But for every human who died, 2 more pressed forward, driven by the knowledge that Earth hung in the balance and failure meant extinction. Darius fought at the front of the advance, his grandmother's voice echoing in his mind as he cut down machines that stood twice his height. We survived because we refused to stop. 90% of his team died in those corridors, their bodies left behind as the survivors pushed deeper and deeper into the weapon's core. Finally, Darius and the remnants of his soldiers reached the central chamber, a vast space filled with swirling energy and ancient mechanisms that pulsed with power beyond comprehension. And there, inscribed on the walls in languages that predated every civilization the galaxy had ever known, was a message. Darius felt his blood turn cold as his translator struggled to decode the ancient text. And when the words finally became clear, he understood that everything humanity believed about the universe was about to change. "We created the Veth to cull the weak," the message read. "We created this weapon to test the worthy. If you read this, then you have passed our test and proven yourselves capable of facing what is to come." "What is to come?" Darius whispered, dreading the answer. "What sleeps between galaxies will wake in 10,000 years, the message continued. "It is older than the stars and hungrier than any swarm. Prepare the galaxy or all will end. This is our gift and our warning to those who survive." Darius transmitted the message to Admiral Tanaka even as he moved toward the central power core, knowing what he had to do. "Captain, get out of there," Tanaka commanded. "We can destroy the weapon from outside." "Negative, Admiral," Darius replied. "The core is already charging for a final shot at Earth. If I do not overload it manually, then Sol will die." There was silence on the channel for a long moment. "Understood, Captain Okonkwo," Tanaka finally said, and her voice was thick with emotion. "Humanity will remember your sacrifice." "Tell them to remember all of us," Darius replied. "Everyone who fought and died so that our people could survive. That is all I ask." He planted his charges on the power core and set the detonators. And then he stood alone in that ancient chamber and watched the countdown begin. His grandmother's face appeared in his mind, smiling the way she had when he was a child, and she told him stories about the heroes who saved humanity. "I kept my promise, grandmother," he whispered. "I never stopped fighting." The charges detonated and the power core exploded in a cascade of energy that tore the precursor dreadnought apart from the inside out. Captain Darius Okonkwo died instantly, and Sol survived. In the aftermath of the battle, the hegemony as it had existed for 10,000 years came to an end. The circle of preservation was dissolved, and its leaders were arrested, charged with crimes against sentience for the attack on Velthus Station and the attempted destruction of Earth. The 12 spheres reformed themselves into a new coalition called the Galactic Covenant, with humanity as a founding member and military leader. Admiral Tanaka addressed the first assembly of the Covenant, standing before representatives of species that had once abandoned her people to die. "We did not ask to be your saviors," she said. "We did not want this burden, but the universe does not care what we want." She paused and looked at the faces around her, alien and strange, and yet now bound together by necessity. "Something is coming," she continued. The precursors knew it. The Veth were only the beginning. And when the void wakes, it will not ask which species is oldest or proudest. It will only ask who is ready to fight. Her voice rose with passion and conviction. "Humanity has been ready for 300 years. The question is whether you will stand beside us." 50 years later, a memorial statue stood on the rebuilt Velthus Station, showing Captain Darius Okonkwo with his hand raised toward the stars. Beneath the statue, an inscription was carved in 100 languages. The galaxy believed the Orion arm was lost. They were wrong. We were not lost. We were forging ourselves into something that could not be broken. And when darkness comes again, we will be waiting. Across the galaxy, the Covenant built and prepared. Human engineers working alongside Alph scientists and Elathi philosophers. The Horizon fleet expanded, its ranks now filled with ships from 100 species, united by the knowledge of what was coming. And in the void between galaxies, something ancient stirred in its sleep, dreaming of hunger. But humanity watched. Humanity waited. And humanity remembered. The darkness would come, but when it did, it would find not a divided galaxy of frightened species. It would find warriors who had been forged in fire and tempered by sacrifice. It would find the children of those who refused to die. It would find humanity, and humanity would make it wish it had stayed asleep.